Welcome to the third session of Broken and Mended. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to use the chat for any questions.
Someday morning, when this life is over, I got to leave one day. Away, hey, way. I'm going to that land where shall never end. Oh, fly away. Yeah, y'all do me a favor and sing it again. Some glad morning when this life is over. If you miss me from praying down here, I'm going to that land where joy shall never end. Oh, that land, will there be nothing but joy shall never end. Oh, I fly away. Here's what I'm gonna do that day. I'm going to fly. I'll fly away. When my burden's all over down here, I'll fly away. When I lay my burdens all down, I'll fly away. No more trouble for me on that day. I'll fly away. I'm going to fly. I'll fly away. I'm going to fly. I'll fly away. Don't you wanna fly? I'll fly away. I'm going to fly. I'll fly. Y'all do me a favor and sing it again. Some glad morning when this life is over. I'm gonna fly away. Yeah. Away.
Everybody come on in and have a seat. We need to go ahead and get started. We've allowed a few minutes for those who are late, as well as we have another little issue we have to wait a minute or two for, but I think we can get started.
Yes, welcome back. And Katie is going to do this next session, my wife, because this is about caregivers. And she wants to focus on some encouraging words and some supporting words, maybe some practical words for those that are in the position of caring for those who have a chronic health condition. Part of the reason I'm taking a moment to introduce her, because we're stalling a little bit. There they are. We forgot the handouts at my parents' place, and they had to go back and get it. So they are coming out. You'll need a handout for this, I think. It's not your main handouts. That's the reason why you don't have it. So that's my computer. And who knows what else is in there? So. Well, I'll get the handouts out, Katie, if you want to get us started. Oh, yeah, so Katie will take us through this session on caregivers. I'm going to do a session directed toward caregivers, but from the perspective of people with the chronic illness, just some things we would want you to know that could be helpful and maybe not so helpful. And then the last session today will focus specifically on the issue of children, families with children with chronic illness. So that's what we'll do today.
All right, is that high enough? So this isn't my typical role, so we're just gonna pretend we're just sitting in the living room talking. That's what we gotta do today. So I'm excited to be here and to get to share with you guys. Although hearing a lot of your stories, I feel like I'm in a room of very experienced caregivers, and so I feel like I've kind of come on this more recently than some of you have really dealt with some hard things. So hopefully some of the things we share will be encouraging and maybe give you some resources that might be helpful to you. So our family really loves Lord of the Rings. It's deeply embedded in all of our family activities and jokes and references. And so some of the things I think about when Sam is one of my favorite characters. So if you don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, I apologize. But Sam is one of my favorites. And I think because he's that tried and true friend that's there. And so there's two different kind of quotes. This is one of them, but also another, where Frodo's headed off on this journey that's going to be very tough. And he tells him, Sam, I want you to go back. I'm doing this by myself. And he goes, of course you are, but I'm going with you. And that's kind of how I feel like my role with David. Of course, he's bearing this burden of, chronic pain, but I'm going with you. So we're going to do this together. And I can't really always know exactly what he's doing, what he's feeling. But then there comes the other quote where it says, I can't carry it for you, right? Like I can't take the pain. I can't take it on my shoulders. And I wish I could some days just to say, well, let me carry it for a little while and you get a break. That's not possible. But it says, or Sam says to Frodo, I can't carry it, but I can carry you. So I'm going to support you in any way that I can, any way I can bring you comfort, in any way I can do something to know that you're not alone in this. And, it's a journey. I'm sure there's times where it worked better than others, and times he wanted to not tell me how much he was hurting to protect me some. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. A lot of this material, really like 98% of this material, comes from a young lady. Her name is Emily Maritz, and she's from Australia. Yes, right? And David came across her kind of early on in his looking for things out there about chronic pain. And she is a young woman who, from the kind of background, what's the word I'm looking for? From the vantage point of a sister and a daughter is how she's been experiencing this. She's born into a family where her mom had severe sickness. And so she kind of grew up with a mom that had some things that she had to deal with and adjust to. And then her sister got very sick. And so this whole time she's kind of come up, and so she's come up with this term as a watcher. And so that's where we get that idea of a watcher, is someone who is watching. And she calls the people who are sick their loved ones. So if you ever want to follow up more on some of this material, she has a website, and it's on the back of the handout. And she has a blog for each and every one of these things we're going to talk about, and she just talks about them more and expounds on it more. So I hope as we go through these, you'll find one that resonates with you and maybe helps kind of identify some of the feelings you might have and help you kind of process them. I have to confess, I'm not very good at processing this on my own. I kind of like to avoid it all and pretend like it doesn't exist on my part. And so it's good for me too, as well, to kind of identify sometimes some of the feelings we might be having as watchers and how we can maybe communicate that to our loved one as they're going through things. So we're just going to kind of go through this list, and if you have questions at any time, feel free to interrupt and ask them as we go through. So again, her website is called Called to Watch, is what her website. So it's a really good resource if you're looking for something. So sometimes as a watcher, we have these feelings, and again, I said we don't usually like to acknowledge them. We like to have all the focus on our loved one because they're the ones that are going through different things, different surgeries, different, pain, different things that are happening. And then you as the watcher are just supposed to be there, right, and support them and not have the focus on yourself, but yet you're going through this with them. And again, I kind of go back to the whole story of Frodo and Sam. Sam's on that journey. He feels the hunger, he feels the pain, he feels the tiredness, but he's not the one carrying the burden, but he's alongside with them. And so I think that's how we can feel at times. So one of the very first thing is kind of an overwhelming helplessness. So at times there's nothing you can do for your loved one. Like there's really maybe physically you can, make them as comfortable as possible. You can do the things that they enjoy, but at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to take away the pain or the trouble that they're having in that moment. So overwhelming helplessness can be one of those things that you can feel. Obviously frustrated. We can get frustrated that we don't think it's fair. Like we don't think it's fair that our loved ones having to go through it, that we're having to go through it, that our family's having to go through this. And so we have times where we just kind of just feel like this is not what we would like. We can be, we'll talk about other emotions, but just it's okay to be frustrated at times, and acknowledge that. And again, a lot of these come as, again, she's a sister and a daughter. So this is a different relationship than a wife would be. So I think sometimes some of these things that we talk about may seem like she's younger. She's much younger. She was writing these, so it kind of makes sense as you go through. Sometimes we can feel jealous of other couples that are getting to go and do things, and you're not getting to do those things, or you have to account for what toll is this going to take. Even like if we're going to go to dinner at a couple's house, I have to think, okay, their dining room chairs are super uncomfortable, and they like to play games, and that's not going to be comfortable for David. So do I accept that invitation, or we always check in with each other. I'm like, how are you feeling? Can we do this tonight? Is this something you can handle? And normally couples just say, oh yeah, that'd be fun, let's get together and do that. But there's more that we have to think about, as a watcher, and you're kind of in a protective mode of how much you can expose your loved one to, and so you're the buffer there. But it can kind of sometimes we feel jealous of others who don't even have to think about that. So one of the things. Sometimes you can feel like a burden, that if you have a problem, you're like, I can't add that to my loved one's burden, and so maybe we keep things from them, or we don't share everything that maybe is going on just because you don't want to burden them anymore. Or if you do have something you're going through, then you feel like this is, which I can tell you Dave is very good about our back and forth. We've had times where I did some attention and things like that, so that's been very good. This one's a little more honest, but sometimes you feel like you've run out of sympathy. You're like, I am tired of telling you I'm sorry you don't feel good today, or I am tired of doing that for you. And it's just kind of an honest moment where maybe you're starting to realize that you need a moment of refreshment. I think some of you have shared with us as caregivers, you didn't have the focus on you at all. And you got to remember, you're human, and there's only so much of yourself that you're able to give before you really need to make sure you're replenishing, that store for yourself so that you have something to give to them. So if you're recognizing that you feel like that, you need to pay attention to those feelings and not just keep muscling through, because it's not healthy for you as well. This one, the guilty one, this one I mentioned it a little bit. I started to feel this way when I couldn't go to doctor's appointments with him, or I couldn't do that because my job required me to be there. Early on in his journey, I was a stay-at-home mom, so we'd just make a day of it. We lived in New Mexico, so it was always an 1.5 to 3 hour drives every time we'd go to the doctor. And so we'd get in the car and, the kids, and we'd go and have a day and have fun and kind of make it fun to go to a doctor's appointment. But then when I started working, he had to go by himself, and I was like, well, what did they say, and how did they do this? And I'm wanting to know all this information, and he was good about remembering what they were saying, but I felt like I was no longer there with them. I was not as available, so I felt guilty about that sometimes, that I couldn't be there like I was before. So guilt definitely comes into it. Or if there's just times like other things. I think she talks about, this is one where you can tell she didn't live with her mom all the time, and so she was like, well, I'm a half hour away, how can I get there, what can I do? Are there just other things that were taking your time away? So guilt can come into it. This one was too young or unequipped. I think we can feel unequipped. I don't know if I felt ever too young to handle it, but that, the burden that you've been asked to carry was not one that you asked for. I don't think anybody else would have asked for it, but maybe we feel unequipped to deal with it. And so reaching out to others, finding out how we can maybe do that better. And then obviously communication with your loved one. And I think that's something that can always be developed and worked on, and we always are working through that. Sometimes you can be angry, and this is kind of going back to the lament that David talked about earlier today. You as a watcher also get to lament. You get to realize there's things that are no longer going to be a part of your life that maybe you thought would be, or things have to change and you have to adjust those expectations. And so anger can definitely be a part of that, part of the cycle. I feel like the cycle of grief we're a little more comfortable with, or have talked about more, and I think it's similar to we're grieving a life that is no longer what we thought it would be. And so obviously we make adjustments and we move on and we change our expectations, but there's times we need to face kind of those feelings we have and not feel guilty for having them. We're human, we have a range of emotions, and we can work through those. This one especially is kind of more from someone that's adjacent to the suffering. So maybe as a wife, I'm not going to make future plans that don't involve David, but like if you were planning to go to college as a young person and you realized, I can't be that far away from my loved one who might need me, that would be something that would be difficult to make plans for. Or even just trying to think, what it is you were hoping to accomplish, then maybe you have to adjust those things so you're uncomfortable planning a future that you're not quite sure if that's going to work out. And we've had to take several leaps of faith in ministry, and so I think it kind of goes hand in hand, but not knowing exactly how that was going to turn out. Is his health going to hold up? Are we going to be able to do this? And both just planning and being uncomfortable planning our future. Sometimes just burdened by the responsibility. If you don't have anybody else that you're sharing all of this with, sometimes you can feel really responsible. I know early on in our, I think like, I'm trying to think of how long ago it was, but I was in charge of the finances. So like I was the one that paid all the bills, I was the one that watched everything, and we didn't do that together. So I was just really the one who did it, and eventually became to the point where like, you have to see what's going on. Like I can't bear that burden of knowing kind of what's going on in our family and our finances alone. And so that was definitely a time where I felt burdened by the responsibility of trying to keep track of everything and know what was happening. And we worked together on that quite a bit more. This one also talks about just always having to be the one that updates people on your loved one. Like you're the source of contact, right? So as soon as you walk in the doors to church and you're like needing some refreshment and everyone's like, oh, how's so-and-so doing? How are they doing? What's going on? And of course you're glad that people are interested in what your loved one, but sometimes you feel like, but what about me? Like, sometimes the focus is often on your loved one and that responsibility of saying the right thing and knowing how people are following it. So that's some of them. There's just a few more. Sometimes you feel like your lifestyle has been hijacked. Maybe you guys were really active before and you did lots of things outdoors, and all of a sudden that's no longer a possibility for you and your spouse to do together. And so you feel like that wasn't, kind of what we had in mind, and you do make some adjustments that way. You can feel sad and upset, obviously. This is not a path that you wanted to go down, and so kind of processing those. You have nothing to show for your time. So again, this kind of comes from the perspective of a younger person where she was doing the caregiving, and so in the time of her life where she should have been going to college or maybe getting a job or doing these things, she was doing none of that. And so people are like, well, what have you been up to? Well, I've been taking care of my mom, and that's really all that's been happening. And so you feel like maybe you're not progressing in your life like you thought you would, or making those advancements that you thought you would, because so much of your time is focused on something else in life. And then you do need to face that your identity has changed. That you are someone different than you were before. You as a couple are different than you were before. Even your role as a child, if it was a parent that you were taking care of, that role has changed now. And so and I think some of it, sometimes we can think, well, that's just life. Things change, we adjust, we move on. But it's okay to acknowledge that things have changed, and chronic illness is what took that from you. It was not normal advancement of life that maybe changed things, but really something came in and robbed you of time that you were expected to have. And then sometimes even that your relationship has changed. That no longer is it maybe equal partnerships anymore. If that was the case, then your spouse happens to be needing more attention or not being able to carry the load as much as they used to. Or even, I think even within a parent and child relationship, that's changed. All of a sudden you're the child, but you're taking care of a parent in a different way than you thought you would be. So those are just all different things that can kind of come up as a watcher. And again, I think for myself, I usually just don't ever think about that stuff. And I just kind of go through life and I take care of what needs to be taken care of. But it's not super healthy to do it that way. And so to spend some time kind of focused on that, thinking about that. Emily, she talks about how that God was a watcher. And that really brought me a lot of comfort when kind of thought about that he watched his son suffer. He did that. He, had to go through that. And he sees a lot of suffering in this world. And so I think relating in that way was really helpful to me, to be able to kind of acknowledge that and to relate and to know that he's watching, he cares, he comforts, and that we can do the same thing, as watchers in this. And so the relationship changes. Sometimes you're the watcher, sometimes you may be the loved one, depending on what's going on in your life. But I think as a watcher, that you have a burden, and hopefully can communicate that to your loved one when needed and be able to share in that. Not quite the last thing, but just the idea too that referenced a little bit, but that you need to get that refreshment as well. And so I don't know, I think there's certain people in my life that I can go to and pretty much say anything to, and hopefully you can find that person. If you don't have that person, journaling or just praying, or some other way that you can express some of those feelings, can be really, really helpful to you. And I think this verse out of Philippians has always been one that is comforting to me. It says, "Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus." So I think as a watcher, I definitely rely on the peace of God to get through really difficult times and hard times. And so hopefully leaning on your faith and reaching out that way can be an encouragement to you. David he mentioned it before, the podcast In the Seams, and he's already interviewed a couple of watchers on that. If you go back, I know Jeremy Harrison's on there. I meant to see who else was there as a watcher.
There were 2 Jeremys.
Okay. Okay, a couple of husbands who are watching their wives who are going through different things, and he interviews them. And then he has one coming up with Nate Brooks. It'll be available in about 2 weeks. And Nate wrote a book called Disrupted Journey, Walking with Chronic Pain and Illness. And he's the watcher in this situation. His wife is the one that has been going through that. And so that's coming out in a couple weeks, so I'd encourage you to check that out or even look into that book. But I think it would be an encouragement to you to read through that. So, any questions?
Patient person, more patient than I am, but patience with certain people in your life that you're trying to take care of them, and they don't really want your help because they're so independent, and they're elderly, and they want to feel like they can do it themselves because they want to feel useful. And then when you try to help them, they I don't need your help. I can do this. And that's really hard. That's between me and my mom.
Yeah.
She's 96, and she's very independent, very strong. And I admire that in her, but on the other hand, I don't feel like I have enough patience sometimes to deal with it.
I think it's hard. Sometimes I do try to be overly helpful to David, and he's like, "No, really, I got this now." I'm like, "Okay." And it's hard for me to trust him sometimes, and so it's a little different than what you're talking about. But when I can ask him, or I'm trying to intervene for him on something, and he's like, "No, it's okay. I've got this one. I'm going to be okay." And so learning to listen to your loved one too is hard, but also takes a lot of patience.
Yeah, that's a virtue for sure.
Yeah.
You haven't spoke anything about pain medication. People that have to take prescription meds for pain control. Do you have any experience that you can share with us?
I don't know if David wants to speak to that. I mean, we've definitely. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I do, I get to play pharmacist every couple of weeks, and I fill up all David's meds. So I did want to be a pharmacist in high school, so maybe that was a little something I didn't know was coming. But I mean, my husband does. He's been through lots of different kinds of pain management type systems. We try lots of different ones and why they work. We'll talk to you about our son later. He's also taking some things that help with his pain. But I don't know if you had a more specific question. If are you on opioids or what you were kind of thinking? I don't know.
Just medication in general.
Yeah. I mean, he's been through, there's quite a list. So a lot of times it's just try it. If it works, then we keep it for a while. And then if it stops working, we'd have to try something else. So he's been on some more heavy-hitting ones, and at different times he can come off of some. But no, we're pro-drugs in our family. Sorry, I don't know if you heard my story last night, but I was really sick as a high schooler, and so my mom was all like, "We say yes to drugs in our family." So that was a little funny joke for our family, but it was just because I had to take a lot of drugs. And so that was kind of where we definitely take what has been advised by doctors and try other things too, but I don't know if that helps.
Oh, I'm sorry. My wife had cancer for 10 years before she passed. Oh, I'm sorry, get out of here, okay. Anyway, I didn't really seem to feel any of what you just mentioned until about 2 weeks before she died. She was in bed, she couldn't, her left side was completely gone. And she asked me one day when she saw one of the nurses there, am I dying? And I couldn't answer. Couldn't tell her.
Yeah.
And that's when I felt the worst. Useless. And, but other than that, I carried on with her in every way possible. But that last week and a half or so, just I couldn't do anything. I was lost. And so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think feeling helpless is definitely the hardest for sure.
One of the things you mentioned in this was the idea or the reality of a burden. But what if it's one you're caring for? We'll repeatedly say, I'm sorry, I'm a burden to you. And you really don't know how to respond to that, because what we did, we had my mother-in-law with us for almost a year before she passed. And we were happy to take care of her. But on one side of the coin, she was a burden. On the other side of the coin, we would do whatever we needed to do, you know, to help her be comfortable. And so our response to her probably didn't help any, as we would say, oh, you're not a burden, you know. But I feel like maybe others experience that same thing from the one they're taking care of.
I know David has expressed kind of the financial. I mean, not that I didn't add to that. We had children, and I was in the hospital, and we've done things where I added to that financial burden. But, you know, at times he can feel like, you know, this is what's happened to our family because of his health. But, of course, we're like, well, there wasn't anything he could help. I do like to say that in my vows, I did not say in sickness and in health. That wasn't in our wedding vows. So I remind him of that a lot. I was like, I didn't say that in our vows. So we left that part out. But
just to add to what Brother Tittle was talking about, you know, sometimes you do run into those moments where your spouse or your loved one will say, are you sick of me yet? Are you tired of me yet? You know, and they're like checking, see where you are in this journey. I guess that's the best way to say it.
yeah.
The thing I was going to talk about is that my caregiver, he tries to do too much for me, and he wants to even not even take care of himself before he will take care of me. He won't let me know how he's feeling, because all that matters is him taking care of me. And I've been sick with pain a long years, and sometimes I guess I'm a little guilty not thinking, you know, where he's at and what. And we've had a talk in the last day or two about this. So about him not taking care of himself, being more, and just always doing everything for me. And I'm like, and I ask him not to, but he says he needs to do that because he needs to make sure that he's taking care of me.
Yeah, because we can't take away what's causing it, but we can make sure everything else is taken care of. He's really, like, I've been having a little issue lately, and I haven't gone to the doctor about it. I'm really bad about not doing that for myself, because if it was happening to him, we'd go. Like, I'd make sure he was there, right? Not that he's not doing that to me. He is really doing it to me lately. But I think it's our tendency to say, well, no, we want to make sure everything's fine with you. But I think the reality is if we don't, eventually, we're going to be unable to take care of them. And if that happens, then we're in big trouble, right? So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, they're participating in my session. Thanks, guys.
I wanted to say that the hardest thing, that my husband had counseled for about 20 years.
Mm.
It came and go.
Yeah, just closer to you.
Oh, closer to me.
There you go.
How about that? Okay. Well, my husband had counseled for about 20 years. The first time he had it I guess about 10 years, 5 to 6 years later, it came back again.
Mm.
During the first time, it wasn't that bad. The second time, it was a lot of doctor's appointments. I went through all of that. He got okay, then it came back another 2 years, and this time it was drastic.
Mm.
But my hardest thing in dealing with him is when I realized, I guess you could say that companionship, when I realized I had no one, the things that he used to do, he couldn't do anymore.
Mm.
I have to do them. And when it hit me is one morning that I had a doctor's appointment. I have to go, my car wouldn't start.
Mm.
So I woke him up out of bed, said I can't start my car. He said, well, use the other one. I couldn't get it out of the garage. And I felt so helpless.
Mm.
And for the first time doing taking care of him, I feel helpless. That when I look around and things that he was doing are just going undone. And it took me a while to kind of handle that, and then until some of the kids, came in to kind of help. But that's one thing you have to really cope with when you realize that the things that he was doing that he can't do anymore, you're going to have to do them, or either get someone else to do them.
Mm-hmm.
But I made it through that.
I-
But I think I cried all the way to the doctor's an hour later.
Yeah, I bet. His first hip surgery, I remember I had to mow the lawn. I'd never mowed a lawn. I'd never done that before. And it had gotten so tall and so thick, which, I mean, I know, sorry, a lot of women mow the lawn. I'd never done it before. And I was like, this is hard. Like, this is really hard. I was not prepared to have to do that. Our boys were a little bit too little. Once they got bigger, they were out there mowing the lawn, but it was, so. So there is if you guys end up having a support group, it's in volume 2, but there is a session that Emily actually helped write for it. And so it's a session where we kind of go over these things, but then you just also tell your story as a watcher. And it's a really encouraging session. So if ever that was something, just kind of it would be a good thing to go through. And yeah, well, thank you for listening and participating, asking questions.
We're going to take the break in between the second and third session, so we're not going to take that right now. Katie's session was a little shorter by design, although you guys had such good participation that, it went a little longer, and that was good. I want to say, again, if you need to go to the bathroom, you need to get up and move around, that's fine. I just need to take a moment and flip the clip on this mic around so I can put it back on my lapel. Sorry. It's a woman's polo shirt and the buttons are on the other side. So she had to flip it around a different way. But I wanted to follow up a couple of things, that Katie was saying. First of all, she mentioned the book by Nate Brooks. Full disclosure, we've not read it yet. We've heard a little summary of it in a very interesting way. I'm not going to tell you all about that right now, but it involved AI. It's kind of a weird world we're living in. But I am going to review the book before I interview him and hopefully get to read it myself. And Katie mentioned she wanted to get it. Not very many books. There are not even that many books about people that are living with a chronic illness or chronic pain. There are some, but even less so for people that are in the caregiving situation. So we're excited about that book. And he's actually who got connected to him by one of the people she was talking about when we had the two husbands on the podcast. And we're interviewing them. It's a good friend of his. But I also wanted to mention, I got to find the right session on my Kindle too. But I wanted to mention that Emily Moritz has written a book. She's written several books. She's kind of a professional author, but the book that I'm thinking about that I've read that was really meaningful to me is called Two Sisters and a Brain Tumor. And it's the story of her sister getting a brain tumor, and she was in the hospital, nearly died, and she was in the hospital for months and months and months, and what this was like for Emily while she was going through this. Not to mention her mom that was also needing a lot of care. And so I really thought that was a good, it's written as a memoir. All right, one second, let me see if I can find the right session here. So, and one other thought just from Katie's session, is that she talked about needing to get refreshed and needing to make sure that you go and find some time for yourself somehow. And you may need help to do that, right? Maybe you have a situation where someone needs to come and sit with your loved one so that you can go and get a cup of coffee or just get outside and pray or go visit with a friend. In some cases where it's not as drastic like ours, it's okay for Katie to leave me. I can take care of myself, she helps in a lot of ways, but she's gone to a women's retreat, last fall. She went up to Montana. She was gone for 3 days, and I survived it. Biggest problem was, if I was going to starve or not. But I made it okay. And so when it is possible for those of us that have the chronic condition to give our loved one a break where they can get recharged and refreshed, that's a good thing to do. And so I think that's another thing that we could go a little deeper on, just the different ways in which we could do that. But I'm going to turn this around a little bit now. This session's called Helping the Hurting. And what this is about is really those of us that are chronically ill. Sometimes when people interact with us, including close loved ones and family, sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it's not very helpful. And I'd like to help us all be more aware of the hurtful things and the things that can add to the pain, but also then to replace that with what can be helpful. So helping the hurting is what this one's called. And obviously Broken and Mended focuses mainly, we do some stuff with the Watchers like Katie was talking about. We even have a session for it in our books. But it mainly focuses on trying to say encouraging, faith-building words to those struggling with chronic pain. That's where our focus really is. But I know it's important to address those who don't have serious chronic conditions themselves, but they want to be helpful. As you noticed, Katie was just up here. I did not come here alone. And this has never been a me problem. This has been a we problem. And we've dealt with it that way. By the way, one thing, this is what I was going to mention. There was lots of good comments, and I forgot what I was going to say, but now it came back to me. But early on, I was feeling guilty. I mean, really, truly guilty. Like I was burdening the family. I was considering, I needed an MRI. It was going to cost $1,000. And at the time, that seemed like, now it's pennies compared to what we ended up, owing. But at the time, this was early on, and I just thought, I'm not going to do this MRI. I'll just be able to do without it. I just don't want to bring this burden onto my family. And what Katie said to me was very helpful. She said, if the situation was reversed and I was in this situation, would you tell me to get the MRI? I said, well, absolutely. And she says, then that's what you need to do as well. I think it's important to remember that for those of us that feel like we're a burden sometimes, that if the situation were reversed, we would want to be there for our loved one, and we wouldn't want them to feel guilty because we were there for them. And so we need to try to channel that guilt or give that guilt to God and to recognize that this isn't just my problem. It's not just a burden. It's something we're all sharing in this journey together. And we're not trying to place blame or place guilt for any of it. That helped me, though, and it needed to be helped because it was going to get a lot worse than that $1,000 for the MRI. All right, so I want to, as I said, speak to those that Katie addressed, but from the perspective of the ones who are suffering, perspective of those who are hurting, who want our friends and family who care about us to know what is helpful to say, I want to say or do, and what is not helpful to say or do. So a key ethical principle that you hear in medical circles is do no harm. And I imagine everybody desires to do no harm to the people who are already in pain, already hurting. Even more, we want to do good for those who are suffering, especially with those we care deeply about. That's something I think I can help with, some advice. It's not just my advice, it's things that I've heard from many other different people who have been through this. And before I talk about that, though, what is helpful, what is harmful, I do want to say just a few words on behalf of the chronically ill, directly to our watchers, that I hope demonstrate the spirit behind some of the tough things that I'm going to say a little bit later. First of all, we, those of us who have chronic pain, chronic illness, we're not indifferent than you. Everyone has pain in life in some form or another. Usually in many different forms throughout our lives. So please forgive us sometimes if we come across with you couldn't possibly understand kind of attitude. And it can come off a little bit as elitist, as if we were in our own special category of suffering. Pain of all kinds is always deeply personal. And it does no good trying to one-up someone on who has it worse and the kind of pain that we're dealing with. The picture I get is two old war veterans, and they're showing off their scars, to see who has the worst battle scar. It's not really helpful in this context. It is true, though, that something profound has happened to those of us in chronic pain. We eventually lose our sense of remembering what it was like to have a day without pain. And I think this is what we aim to express when we say things like, you don't understand what I'm going through. You don't understand what this is like. And that sentiment is born out of frustration of how difficult it is to relate what is happening in our body. Often a body, especially with autoimmune diseases, that is at war with itself. And you don't understand how your body can be doing this and why it's doing it to you. And it can be really hard to express that frustration. And, it's nearly inexpressible sometimes, our fight with pain and how it has impacted everything else. And so I'm fairly, good with words most of the time. I can usually find the words I want to express myself. But it was different with this. I couldn't always communicate this to Katie. I struggled to communicate with her sometimes because, I assumed, like she kind of talked about in this, from the watcher's perspective, she's tired of hearing about it. She's tired of hearing about how bad I hurt, and I don't feel good, and that's why I can't do this activity, or I'm going to do this activity, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And so then I would just kind of bottle that up. And meanwhile, what's Katie thinking when I'm doing that? He's mad. There's something wrong, and she's having to do a guessing game because I'm not telling her. And I've got to a point where I was really withdrawn from her and the kids, and because I was just, and this is particularly when that chronic fatigue was real bad, it wasn't healthy, and I was just having a difficult time telling Katie, I didn't want to sit at the table and play a card game because I was going to be in pain doing it, and I didn't have any energy for it. And so a counselor suggested that I write it out. Write a letter to Katie to say the things I was having a hard time verbalizing. And I actually did that. I wrote out a letter, a couple pages long, and just trying to explain what was going through my mind. And it helped me, actually. Some people are different. They don't think well through writing. They think better verbally. I actually think better through writing first and then try to verbalize. So for me, this was a really good exercise because it helped me see the problem for myself a little bit better. It's kind of like people who journal, right? That does something for them, helps them to have almost an outside perspective on their own situation. But what it led to with my relationship with Katie is a very meaningful conversation because she read it, and then we were on, kind of grounds in which we could communicate with one another. We had the same starting point in that conversation, and so that was something that was very helpful to us. But emphasize again that we are not different than you and that we all hurt in many ways throughout our lives. And so along those same lines, forgive us when we inadvertently diminish your pain. When your back hurts, whatever it might be, it isn't somehow lessened because mine has hurt every day for the last decade. And I'm saying that sincerely. If anything, it should have caused me to develop more empathy for people who are in that kind of pain. So it's a knee-jerk reaction when my first thought is about myself when I hear about your pain instead of showing concern for you. And notice I've dropped the word we here and changed it to I because this is something that I have struggled with. There are times where I've just been very selfish, and I thought, whoever, it might probably be Katie, whatever she was talking about just didn't rise to the level of what I was dealing with. And that's wrong, and I'm confessing it. And so I do that. I confess it because I personally felt in this area. And I know I can't speak for all those with chronic pain when discussing my feelings and my failures, but maybe some of you can kind of relate to some of this that I'm talking about. We do love those who share this painful journey with us. We could not do it without you. Sometimes we can lose perspective because pain is so demanding of our attention that we may appear selfish. Usually, it is more complex than that. We do need to be willing, though, to humble ourselves if and when we have said something that's unkind or belittled your pain in any way. Having said all that, I hope that you understand the spirit in which I'm about to say some things that maybe are going to be difficult to hear, especially if you have done some of the things on the not helpful list and you know that you've done some of those things. Obviously I didn't know that, I didn't know your situation, but I think it's good for you to know that those comments or those actions may not be helpful to the one who is hurting. And so I wanted you to understand the spirit of which I say this, because I don't think we should be defensive. We all need humility when dealing with these difficult challenges surrounding chronic pain and illness. We all need understanding. We all need compassion for one another. Like when Katie was talking and sharing from the perspective of a watcher, I should have compassion for her, not because I feel like I'm a burden and I'm the problem. That's not what I mean. But I should have compassion because she has her own struggle related to this thing that I'm walking through. And so let's keep that spirit of listening and being kind to one another and having humility. So let's move into hopefully some practical things here. And I want to start with what is probably the most important thing that you should not do. And we'll sum it up with this way: please do not try to fix us. And there's a couple ways people will try to do this: by encouraging us to be mentally tougher, or telling us to try the latest remedy that you read about on the internet, or you heard from your hairstylist, or you heard wherever. There is no magic cure for those who are chronically ill. We have spent countless hours with doctors and doing our own research, medical professionals, and we're trying to make our lives as manageable as possible. We have probably tried various diets, maybe even the one that you're suggesting that's going to make us all better. And you know what? Some of those have helped. When I eat a little bit better, when I kind of cut down on carbs and sugar, it does help my inflammation. And, so it's not like we're saying that eating right can't help us feel better. But when someone comes and they think they're going to just fix everything because they have a diet that's going to heal you, or maybe it healed someone they knew, that's probably not going to be very helpful. We've learned to be very resourceful. We know how to seek out information that we need. And so I want to say that you are very, very unlikely to possess the key to our better health, no matter how well giving up diet sodas helped Aunt Susie, And I've actually literally had someone tell me that if I gave up diet sodas, all my problems would go away. Which, guess what? I'd already tried that, and it did not go away. So a couple of years ago, the Christian Chronicle did a feature article on Broken and Mended. It was a really good article. It was kind of one of their main articles in that particular publication. And you can still find it by just Googling Broken and Mended in Christian Chronicle. And they were focusing on our group in Woodward. And because of that article, I started to be on different podcasts and other things, started to get interviewed, word started to get out, and this attracted some people to want to get in contact with me. And they were people who thought, keep in mind, these are strangers, and these are people who thought they could fix me or to fix the people in our support group. One lady from California called me to tell me that she had the gift of healing. And she wanted me to invite her to our support group so that she could heal everyone in the support group. So if I had done that, that'd be the last time that support group ever met, and not because she healed everyone. That would be an extremely alienating thing to do. And guess what happens when it doesn't work? Guess whose fault it always is? Not the healer, the supposed healer. It's your fault. You didn't have enough faith. If you'd had enough faith, you would have gotten better. And I hear about this kind of church hurt all the time from people. Another person was an elder in a church, called to fix me with his latest secret diet, that was going to bring about healing to all of my problems. By the way, when I shared my problems in the Christian Chronicle, it wasn't for the point, again, of asking people to try to fix me. It was for the point of knowing that to tell people they're not alone, to give them a story that they can relate to. It's not that we're seeking to be fixed. And then a woman from Tennessee called me, and she had a similar solution. By this time, I was getting a little bit irritated, so I offended her when I told her that I wasn't interested and that I dealt with my medical problems with my doctors and other medical professionals. Well, those people were complete strangers to me, but sometimes this kind of advice it comes from people close to us, and it's rarely helpful when it's given. We got about 500 people in our Facebook group currently. So I asked them, okay, tell me one thing that's helpful, tell me one thing that's unhelpful. And I got a lot of responses to that post on my Facebook group. So I want to share that, and I'm going to start with the unhelpful answers first, because we're kind of on that topic. All right, so you'll see some common themes, some things that we've already touched on. You'll see some of these themes even repeated by multiple different responses. But these are some of the responses. You should try this diet, supplement, holistic treatment. I remember I had someone tell me that very likely all my problems were because of parasites. That would seem so out of left field. By the way, this was someone in the support group. And she hadn't been cured of her parasites or whatever she had. But anyway, everyone's got an idea, don't they? How about let's pray for healing for you. That sounds like a good thing, right? But it implies that maybe you haven't prayed enough, you haven't prayed correctly, or you would be healed. By the way, there are times where I may ask someone to pray that I'm healed or that I get better. But let that person be the one to initiate that conversation. Or how about this one? Is your sin causing your illness? The next one, they simply move past it, my illness, as if it's boring or a burden to talk about. So maybe someone asks them how they're doing. They start to get into it a little bit, and their eyes kind of glaze over. And they're trying to get away. That can be hurtful. And kind of along with that is the next one, not caring enough to learn. The next one, you look so good. Well, that sounds like a nice compliment, but in this context, it implies, so you must be better. We hadn't talked about the concept of invisible illnesses, and a lot of these things that we are talking about are not visible. You cannot tell right now by looking at me that I have an autoimmune inflammatory arthritic disease. You can't tell by looking at me that I struggle with Crohn's disease. You can't tell by looking at me that I've had a hip replacement already in my 40s. And you can't tell any of that stuff. It's invisible. So when a person makes an assumption because they think that, oh, you look good, you look healthy, you must be better, that's a wrong assumption. But the next one's even worse, I think. You can kind of hear the tone in that all caps, and that was the way they put it in there when they responded. Are you still having problems? I mean, shouldn't you be over this already? That's not very kind, is it? Okay, the next one, maybe you need to change your diet. That's been a common theme. Or stop doing X, Y, and Z. This sometimes comes into play with people's weight. Of course, all of us, including myself, would be healthier most of the time. Some people need to put on weight, but most of us need to take off a little weight, and that would help some things. But to suggest to someone that has been dealing with a terrible illness and terrible chronic pain that all their problems would be solved if they dropped a certain amount of weight is a very unkind thing to do. And it misses maybe a key point. Sometimes we correlate weight with the cause. You're mixing up correlation and causation. It may be that the person struggles with their weight because they had to give up an active lifestyle because of the thing that happened to them. And so we need to keep that in mind. And that's just a judgmental statement anyway. Don't tell people that, please. Here's one. It's kind of interesting. Well, okay, let me look back up here so I remember where I was. You need to stop taking pain medication. So that issue was kind of brought up here on the front row a little bit, about prescriptions and medications and so forth. And someone tells you it's not good for you. Well, you don't know that. I mean, nobody wants to be on pain medication if they don't have to be. And I'm assuming that this is not an issue of addiction. Addiction is a real problem. We know that. A lot of people have died in the opioid crisis. But most people that are on chronic pain that have to take those pills to a certain degree need it to just get through the day. And I have dealt with people who were having suicidal thoughts because they were all of a sudden cut off from having their pain pills. So anyway, in any case, that's a little bit off subject. The point is we don't need to tell people to stop taking their medications. Or we're all going through that. It's called getting older. I've had a lot of people tell me that because my problem started when I was 35. And I would be going through something really horrible, and somebody would say, well, wait till you're my age. Well, just think about how bad it will be when I do get to your age. So, the next one is kind of similar. Let's go. You're all too young to have arthritis. Well, I just said this one. Wait until you get my age. The next one, you need to be up and down more, walk more to stay limber. Again, that's probably good advice that I could hear from my doctor, or if I kind of am brainstorming with my loved one about what might help me to feel better. Like for me, for example, what will help me feel better is if I do some stretching, because my disease causes stiffness and even rigidity. And so, I know that can be something that can be very helpful, and I'm not very good at doing it. But it's still, Katie can say this to me, I think, because we have an understanding, but she doesn't say it very much. She knows that I've got to take the initiative if I want to change something, if I want to make things a little bit better for myself, that I can take that step. It's not going to heal me from an autoimmune disease. It may help in some ways, but it's not going to heal me. Someone always has it worse. Let me tell you about, whoever. That's not very helpful. And then we kind of heard this one in a different way earlier with the are you still having problems, but why aren't you better yet? Why haven't the doctors fixed you? Haven't you had this long enough? So you get the idea, and again, there may be times we seek new ideas. There may be times we want to brainstorm with a few people close to us about trying some new things. But unsolicited advice usually tends to put the blame back on the person with the chronic health conditions, because it implies you wouldn't have this problem if you just, whatever it is that they're going to say. And a lot of times people, I think they get said, these things get said because people want to be helpful. They don't know what to say. And so they're trying to think of some way to this. A lot of times you'll hear it's kind of a running joke that guys always want to fix something. I mean, I think it can go for guys and women. But yeah, we have that tendency. If there's a problem, we want to fix it. We can't fix it. We get really frustrated about it. And it may even be your fault that we can't fix it. Well, that's just, not going to be that helpful. But I do think that frustration sometimes leads to saying some of these things. And I think most people, they just don't know what to say or do that would be helpful. And so they end up saying something that isn't helpful. So I want to focus now on helpful things to do. And we'll start, if the most important thing not to do is don't try to fix us, well, the most important thing to do is believe us when we tell you we are hurting. That's the most important thing. If you can simply believe us when we tell you that. It's by nature hard to tell people that you love, that no, I can't do that. No, I'm not able to do that. I do not say that to Katie. it unless I really cannot do it. And she knows that. And so, many times when Katie and I were doing something together, even worshiping in church or, shopping or attending a sporting event, could get to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. And it was like I was at the event, but I wasn't really at the event because I was absorbing none of it. I was in such pain. And it was all I could think about. And there have been times where I told Katie, I'm going to the car, and I'm going to stretch out in the back of the car. And she knows that if I tell her that I'm not just saying that because I don't want to enjoy this time with her. I'm saying it because I'm right now not able to do that. And so I think she's been very understanding in that regard. But this is about believing people when they tell us this. And Katie was and is very good about hearing that. And she added no shame or guilt to what was already a difficult situation. I also asked our Facebook group what words and actions they found helpful to them. So I'll give you some responses here. Ask how I'm feeling and really listen. That's difficult to do because a lot of times, can we be honest, we don't feel like we have the time to engage in a very lengthy conversation. But we should at least on occasion, if we really love that person, approach them and say, tell me how you're doing. Tell me what's going on with you. And I think that can be so meaningful to that person, to find someone that really cares in a way that goes deeper than your typical church greeting, how are you, fine. By the way, when you ask me that, church, I usually say fine too. We're all kind of guilty of that, and even when I'm not fine. But if someone slows down and says, how are you really? And I feel like I can trust that person, then I might open up to them, more likely to open up to them. Comments like, I'm so sorry you're going through this. So it's okay to express sympathy for the person. Or I'll pray for you. That's a little bit different than we were talking about, let's pray so you get healed. But I'll pray for you. Of course we need prayers, and we appreciate prayers. Or even a statement like, I wish I could take it away. I wish, kind of like Katie's illustration with Sam, even just for a while, I wish I could take that from you. And again, like she said, you can't, but you can help carry that person. Practical things like, I'll bring you a meal. I'm giving you a ride. I'm cleaning your house. Like my mom was saying a little while ago, not everyone is open to that kind of help. And, we do need to respect people's boundaries. I'm not talking about Granny Mom because I know she needs someone to come in and help her. And that's the difficult thing, to sometimes get people to see that. But I think most of the time, people are very very open to receiving that kind of help. Didn't Debbie Reeves one time come in and clean our house, Katie? You don't remember? Yeah, I thought maybe she did. But I tell you, one thing I do remember they did is they brought a meal over to us once a week for years. And, I mean, that's a lot of love and sacrifice, isn't it? To do that every week. Was it a Tuesday? Do what? Thursdays. It took such a load off of Katie. Maybe a back. Is it? Oh, that's back. All right. That went off for a second. All right, thanks. But that's a real example of love in action. And that was something that was an incredible blessing to us. And maybe you're not in a position to do that every week. But what if you got together with a small group of friends that cared about that person and you said, between the four of us or something, we can bring them a meal once a week. I mean, that would be so powerful, so practical. Let's see, what else do we have up here? Bringing you a meal, so we'll go to the next one. I want to spend time together. What would you be comfortable doing? So not trying to get them to do what you want them to do, because they may or may not be able to, but ask them what do they, and maybe it's just coming over and watching a movie with them. I don't know what it might be, but for other people it would be different things. For me, it probably would be, most of the time, something kind of relaxing like that where I could get as comfortable as possible. But we do enjoy spending time with our loved ones and friends. In fact, we need that. And we just need to be willing to do it on their terms sometimes. I know you're in pain. How are you doing mentally? We've talked a little bit about the overlap between physical health and mental health today. Can I take care of your kids for an afternoon? So if you got small kids in the home, so you can get some rest. That's another thing this couple that we told you about, Scott and Debbie, did. They also took our kids one evening a week, every week. That was called, they called it, my kids loved it. They were still young, and they called it Fantastic Fridays. And so the kids would go, they would pick them up at school. They would go over to their house, and Katie and I could go have a date night, have some time together. Those are powerful blessings that we can give to other people. So we don't need to be fixed, but we do need your love and support. We need you to believe us and to listen to us. And every once in a while, we may just need to vent. We may just need to cry. We may just need to be honest about the burden that we're carrying. And we want a safe person, a listening ear to be able to do that to. Someone that's not in the middle of that going to try to interrupt us and say, well, have you tried this? Just listen. I tell you, this just came to me. It's not in my notes, but I was thinking of a situation where we had a man in our church who lost his son to cancer. You know, they did everything possible, of course, to try to save him. And it was horrible. And everyone knew the son had grown up in our church. Everyone knew him. Everyone knew this father and his wife, the mother. And, well, I don't think he'll mind me telling your name. His name is Russ. And so Russ one time came to my office. He wanted to talk. This is maybe 6 weeks or so after the funeral. And he said to me at the beginning, he says, before I start, I want you to know that I just need you to listen to me. Please do not interrupt me. Because apparently every time he tried to share what he was going through, that's what was happening. People were, either they couldn't handle it, and so they tried to cut off the conversation, or they tried to rush in with some kind of advice. So that's what I did. I just let him talk for, it was probably an hour before I said anything. He told me the whole story, everything that they had been through, trips down to Mexico to try some experimental treatment when the chemo wouldn't work, all kinds of things and struggles that he had. And he needed to kind of speak about that like Job did. You know, like Job needed, when his friends first showed up, the first thing they did is they joined him on the ash heap. And for that week, they were really good friends. But that really is something to be admired, sitting with someone on the ash heap for 7 days and being silent. But, you know, of course, you know how that story goes. They end up kind of getting onto their high horses, and then they become miserable comforters. So if you want to help, join us on the ash heap and cry with us for a while. And by the way, we won't stay in that state forever. We know how to pick ourselves up and to carry on. We've been doing it for a while now. So sometimes this is all that we, went too far. Sometimes this is all that we need to know. We need your love and support. And if you've ever had to deal with, if we never had to deal with chronic pain, that would still be true, right? I mean, we all need each other's love and support. It isn't truer because of chronic pain, but it makes us more aware of the need that we have for each other. It's the way God made us to be mutually beneficial, to be mutually there for one another. Mutuality is a big theme in Scripture, whether it's talking about between husband and wife, or two brothers, or two sisters, the church and its members. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, when God saw Adam without Eve and said, it's not good for man to be alone. We need each other. And in that, there is a blessing. I just want us to be sure not to waste it. So I'll pause for any questions or comments that you want to make at this time. Even if you have ideas that you've experienced that were helpful or not helpful, that's fine to share too.
If you look through internet, you have every commercial telling you what you need to do to help yourself constantly. If you've got some kind of illness, and I've got to where I just turn them off, because they all have the remedy of what's going to help you. But in the end, you could spend a lot of money on something that is and they're not even from doctors. They're just
Yeah.
and it becomes more difficult sometimes if you're searching for something,
Right.
to help you, and all these commercials say they're going to do this or that.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I want to say one of the issues that contributes to that is there's this kind of crisis of trust with the medical complex today, when your doctors and obviously insurance companies and things of that nature. And I think that's led some people to be vulnerable to other solutions that may not really be a solution, or being pulled in, and even some things, like you said, that can cost money. And so I don't know the answer for you. I just kind of grew up, and I think my parents taught this to me, but we kind of trusted people of authority. Doesn't mean they're always right, and doesn't mean they're always worthy of our trust, but my inclination is to trust my doctor. If he loses my trust, then that's a problem. But my inclination is to trust my doctor, that we're really trying to figure out together what's best. But some people really struggle with that, and I understand it. There's a lot of confusion out there, even amongst doctors, and I think, again, for whatever your own views on this and kind of the stuff that led into COVID and after COVID, people had, maybe there was some lost trust there too. So I don't know. But I do think the main thing is we recognize that unless someone's seeking some kind of additional advice, it probably won't be helpful. Any other comments, questions? Yeah, I expect it.
I think I've shared this before here, but it's just something that stayed in my mind for a long, long time. I think I shared with you my dad died of ALS, and I've shared it with the church here when I was 10. And a lot of things transpired the day that he passed away, and our neighbor across the street came to school and told me and my brother, and we went home. And then that night, a lot of people came to church. And I'm pretty sure I was oblivious to what they were saying and what was going on. But I remember one thing that was said to me, well, now you're the man at the house. And I'm 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to either respond or process that. And I think later on I may understood what they were trying to say. I'd have to mow the yard. Well, I was already doing that. But
right.
But anyway, that was kind of a sticky thing for me as a kid.
Yeah.
Back then. I don't know if you want to put that on your list.
Well, yeah, but I think it's it's very relevant to where someone didn't know what to say, so they come up with something to say, where it may have been better just to put their arm around you and hug you and say, we love you and we're going to be there for you. Because, no 10-year-old's ready to be the man of the house, right? Especially on that day. So, yeah.
Another good book that one of my mother's doctors told me to read, and it's called The 36-Hour Day. And he said it's really good, and it's really good for caregivers, and it helps you understand what you're feeling and what they're feeling, and it was good.
This is a resource you're saying that you
Pardon?
found? Where did you find this, or where do you get this?
My mother's doctor.
Oh, okay.
Because I was her caregiver,
Uh-huh.
and I had called him one day, and he said, I want you to read The 36-Hour Day. And it's a good book.
Okay, 36-hour day. Us ministers like to fix things too, by the way, if you didn't know that about us sometimes, and we can get in situations where we think we're supposed to have the answers. And if we're supposed to have the answers, then we're going to come up with something even when we don't. So that's probably, again, not Larry, but more mortals like myself, we struggle a little bit with it. Did you? Yeah. So, but so going back to that story I told you about the guy that lost his son, that was instructive to me too, to hear him say that that's what he needed. And then I saw, he told me at the end of it, he thanked me, and he said, I actually do feel somewhat better. Of course, the grief wasn't going anywhere. I mean, it's still with him, I'm sure. But it helped him to be able just to talk, to be able to vent. So, well, I tell you what, let's take a break. We got one more session tonight, and we'll be dealing with chronic illness in children. I don't see a lot of people here that would qualify necessarily as having young children, not judging you, but maybe would have young children in the home. And so we're going to come from that perspective a little bit, but I think the things I'm going to say can apply to having adult children, because we started out with a child in the home who's now in college, and so our perspective is ever changing. And maybe some people are not here that are in that situation because they're in that situation. But I hope that you'll come back and listen to that. And I think there's something in it for all of us too, because I'm also speaking to churches and helping all of us think together, think through what might be helpful to people who have children with serious illnesses. How can the church come alongside of them? How can we come alongside of them? So we will do that after the break. It's 5:22. The session's not going to take all that long, so let's take a little bit longer break and maybe come back at 5:45. So I'll give you plenty of time to get some coffee, eat your cookies, go to the bathroom. Eat a lot of cookies. Yeah, so, all right, thank you.
Oh, this is the, okay, got you, got you.
after the
Mhm.
presentation. Are you still going to the,
Just like home.
just like,
It's scheduled, the 1:30, the 1:30,
what about whatever was happening at the facility? It was some sicknesses within the
oh,
facility.
really? Well, we need to find out today if there is. If it is, and they're quarantining, we need to probably just wait and count. Call Brother Jim's, well, Brother Jim's at the hospital.
No, he went home.
Oh, he's home now?
That's what, his son said
Mm-hmm.
today. He was here earlier. Or was that yesterday?
That was yesterday. Yeah, he was here yesterday. I wonder how come he didn't come back today? He's out of work. Oh, okay.
Saturday is the day that he'll open up the shop.
What shop is he?
Where he lives,
Mhm.
he has a lot of plants and,
He's a nursery? I mean, he runs a nursery.
he actually, oh yeah, I got a olive tree last year and he's still living. Kind of struggling now.
It'll perk up, just water.
Yeah, I think so. What was that you were doing now? Did you just say something? Okay. I don't want any more cookies.
I'm tempted, but I can't drink the coffee, so there's nothing really back there for me except water.
Lemonade.
Yeah, it's got sugar in it. So does it.
So there's a cookie.
Yeah. But that sugar, that lemonade is, it's got more sugar in it than cookies, you know. I can probably eat 5 cookies
Well, I've already, that's it.
to one sip of that lemonade.
I'm ready to go home. I'm not nervous, but my tuckings are still in there.
Okay. Well, as you see, we had some people join us here. My oldest son, Josiah, you've heard about him this weekend if you were here last night. His girlfriend, Sydney. And so, well, you know, father's perception and all. But, well, for you, those of you who have stayed to the end, I know it's been a long day. And so this session will be not too long, but it doesn't mean it's not important. And again, even though I can just tell by our demographics here, there's not a lot of people in the situation directly that we're going to talk about, but you may have been before, or you may have grandkids in that situation, or you know, you just may want to know a way that you can be helpful to people who are going through a situation where there is a kid with a chronic illness, or sometimes multiple kids with chronic illness in a home, and how do we deal with that situation. So I had been living with significant chronic health problems for more than a decade, had already started Broken and Mended, and was already thinking about what would be effective, how could we have a ministry to help people in that situation. I'll tell you a little bit later what kind of inspired those thoughts, but I didn't have any personal experience with it other than the 6 months that we talked about with Josiah when he was a baby. But we didn't have experience with kind of long-term chronic illness, you know, in the home with a kid, just me at that time. And I wasn't looking to gain any experience with that. It was not something I hoped for, but I knew that my children had and would be at a higher risk because of genetics. And as an aside, I want to say that sometimes us as parents, we can really wrestle with a feeling of guilt because what we're afraid we may pass on, you know, to our children. And even though you're not responsible, it's not your fault, you still feel, especially when you see that stuff start showing up in a child, some of the things that you struggled with, you can feel the pain of that guilt. So it's important to remember that even if we pass on a chronic health condition, my parents are smiling over here, but I don't blame you guys, right? So, So, if we pass on a chronic health condition to our children, even if we have, then we need to remember also all those traits that we love about our children. We pass those as well, and so we don't need to feel guilty about that. We can't allow ourselves to obsess over health problems we may or may not have passed on to them. My problems didn't start till I was about 35, so I didn't experience this as a child. But I knew that ankylosing spondylitis, the autoimmune disease that I had, could start at an earlier age. In fact, I was a little bit on the old side for that to be started. And I think it was actually started before I realized it, which was why my hips were in the condition they were. But in any case, it was later on in my life. So anytime our kids had like unexplained joint pain, you know, I can remember one time, I don't know, Josiah, if you remember or not, but his knee swelled up like the size of a softball. So we rushed him into the doctor because we wanted to know, is this starting to happen? So we were just kind of on pins and needles about that stuff all the time. But like a lot of things, when the real thing comes, you don't expect it. You're not looking for it. So Micah, my middle child, was 15, and he was a sophomore in high school, and he seemed to be getting he had a strange virus around Thanksgiving. It wasn't even something that raised an eyebrows. You know that time of year, kids are getting sick all the time. You know, Micah was, you know, working hard. He was in marching band. He was working at a restaurant and all that. And so, you know, he could be just run down and picking up a virus. He missed a few days of school with a fever, is all we thought was going to come of that. Well, when he returned to school, he still wasn't feeling well. He knew that he had to go back to school, but you could tell he did not really feel like he ought to be. And you know, at the same time, I still wasn't that alarmed, because sometimes when you had a bad virus, it can take a while to feel 100%. But as the days became weeks, then we began to be concerned. What was strange was that his fever throughout this time never left. It was low grade, 99 to 100, but you could tell that it was zapping his energy. And it just wasn't normal. I guess they've changed the definition of a fever, in the medical field now, so they won't even count it if you have a 99. Well, Micah didn't normally run a 99. And a lot of times it was getting up to be around 100, and that's still a fever in my book, and certainly was affecting him. Micah had been an exuberant person, kind of the life of the party. He was always happy. Mentioned he was in the marching band, loved playing the drums in the marching band. He was working as a waiter at a local restaurant. He was always smiling, singing. He's still doing singing all the time. I told Katie, we have these boys over at our house this week for spring break. Micah brought all his friends home from Oklahoma Christian, and it's like a musical in our home. They're just always singing, and it's been pretty interesting. But that's how Micah was at his best. He was happy, loved to make jokes, loved to have a good time, be the life of the party. But that Micah vanished. What impacted me the most was watching Micah at the dinner table with his head down on the table and sit there and just wait until felt like he had been there long enough so he could be excused to go back to his bedroom. It was breaking my heart. And, this is an emotional topic for us. When we see our kids change from one way that we knew them to be into someone that we knew they weren't really naturally that way. And it was difficult. And so I ask that you bear with us as we talk about this. And I'm sorry that I got emotional before you were about to speak. But I want to let Katie speak for a few minutes, too, about her observations and feelings as a mother up to this point in Micah's story. There's the handheld here.
Yeah, so I've done better this weekend. I cried a lot on the way down while we were practicing, so I thought maybe I'd get out of my system when we do that. But like David mentioned, I think when you see the loss of something, that you want for your kids, it's hard. It's again, as a watcher, not something that you can take away from them. And at the time, we didn't even know what was going on, and as we started doing, I think David mentioned a little bit about the marching band and stuff. Things that he had to give up. And that was his last time. So the only reason I went to a football game was to watch the marching band at halftime when Mike was out there. And so this next year, he wasn't able to do it. Like, it hurt his hands. His hands hurt to drum the vibrations. He couldn't carry the bass drum anymore on his shoulders because it hurt. And to see him lose some of the things that he loved was difficult for us. And so as we kind of navigated that, we thought, well, what's going to be the end, the end point of this? Are we going to find some solutions? And thankfully, because of David's experiences, we kind of knew what paths to start searching down, so maybe we got to some answers a little quicker than had David not had his experiences. So I don't know if you're going farther. Am I speaking again or something? Okay. So we did, thankfully, he had a rheumatologist already, so we were able to say, hey, we need, we knew what questions to start asking. And we did find some answers pretty quickly from Micah, and thankfully he responded well to some medications and started making some improvements. Thankfully, his school was really understanding, and we were able to get on a 504 plan and do these things so that his absences weren't hurting him anymore. And so I think those things really fell in place pretty quickly, and so it made it a little bit easier for us to move forward. But to kind of see him fade but then start to come back gave us some hope there.
Yeah, Katie covered a lot in that and kind of what happened with Micah. It was difficult in those first few months when you're still looking for a diagnosis. And part of the issue was, though we suspected he might have an autoimmune disease like me, and it might be ankylosing spondylitis, it didn't present like mine did. I never had the fevers and the fatigue that in the early days. I just had basically chronic pain in the joints and all that. And I think too, like Katie was saying, watching him have to give up the drum, something he was really good at, was really difficult. I remember going back to a football game the next year, which would have been his junior year, and it just felt empty for us to be there when the band was playing. It was a painful thing to watch. I know it was painful for Micah. I think Micah maybe, though, could accept it sometimes easier than we could. He just knew that that's where he was and had to move on from it. We did get into that rheumatology clinic. It was the same one I was already in. It was a different provider, but it was a provider I had had before. And so that was pretty helpful because there was a relationship that was already established. He was initially diagnosed with a juvenile arthritic disease, but in a very general sense. I think when they're young like that, they don't want to get too specific because they don't know exactly which way it's going to go. Well, it turns out he was eventually diagnosed with the same disease that I have, ankylosing spondylitis. And then, he was also having skin problems too, so they added psoriatic arthritis to his diagnoses. Whether it's one or both, I'm not sure, but certainly it's got to include the psoriatic part because, again, he has issues with the skin. He takes medicine. Katie said he's been responsive to that. Early on, though, that was not an easy thing because the medicines he was taking took his appetite away, and Micah started dropping weight, and he was rarely hungry. Of course, parents always worry if their kids aren't eating, and we try to talk someone that's not hungry into eating, and that's a difficult thing to do. And so we're kind of telescoping a long period of time here before we really got to the state that you see him there. You see Micah in the picture at Oklahoma Christian. That's his first day when we were setting up. He was really, happy. He's really happy to be there. He's really having a good time. He's on Humira now, which is a very strong autoimmune suppressant, but it's allowed him to get back to mostly a normal life. And so for me, even before I was impacted by this personally, it was my hope one day to have an entire wing of the Broken and Mended ministry that was dedicated to offering support to families that were in this predicament. When everyone else is posing pictures of their kid's latest accomplishment, these parents are maybe reposting or reporting on their child's latest hospital visit. We could all do with a little bit more awareness about what we, and sympathy for those who are in this struggle. Even with a little more personal experience in this area than I used to have, I still don't know exactly what such a ministry is going to look like. I'm still learning, I think, still trying to hear from other people. There are several different perspectives to be aware of. How do you minister to the child or the children themselves? How do you minister to the parents? And let's not forget the siblings. It was not easy for Micah's siblings to watch him change, and so they're impacted as well. And what do both parents and the kids want from their churches in this situation? So again, I asked my Facebook group their perspective, and they delivered, again, some very insightful comments. So you may have these in your handout, but I'll bring them up here too. So some of the things they said that I thought was interesting. So many children's groups and youth groups have a strong competitive game time. By the way, as an aside, they're often of a physical nature a lot of times. But like schools, little time for the things that chronic people participate in, like art and music. Just like certain kids become team leaders in sports, there needs to be so much more encouragement for anyone with a talent to participate and grow. So this is just something I think, when it comes to youth ministers, but other people that lead youth to be aware of, that we're not excluding kids that maybe can't participate. You don't have to stop having the volleyball night because you have a kid that can't participate. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is be aware of them enough that you do something that they can do at other times. So teenage boys. So this person was commenting on having teenage boys in this situation. They hide it from their friends and their family. They try so hard to fit in with the other kids, sometimes to the detriment of their health. And this next one is, I think, every parent's worst nightmare. Kids are so mean, accusing my child of faking symptoms, or of mom, so the person, because she has a chronic illness, a mom brainwashing her to make her believe that she's sick when she really isn't. So almost like they're saying that the mom wants her daughter to appear sick just because the mom is, which has got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But again, kids are mean, sometimes. Not all kids and not all the time, but they can, as you know, they can be very, very cruel at times. Then there's the need for more pastoral support. That was just a general comment they made, and that's the part of the question I feel like I'm wrestling with. And I didn't get as many responses to this question, I think for two reasons. One is because it's a smaller group. Not everyone in my Facebook group, everyone that's there pretty much has chronic illness or chronic pain out of the 500 or so that are in it. But certainly not everyone there has children that, although a lot of them do, but they don't necessarily have children that have chronic illnesses. So it's a smaller group of people. But you'll notice in the few responses that many of the responses concern their peers, even from the parent perspective. Again, we talked about mean kids falsely accuse someone of making up their symptoms, or teenage boys who are afraid to open up because they don't want to be perceived as weak or any different than, a school kid, especially at that age, or almost their worst fear is to be thought of as different than everybody else. And so they can, a lot of times, bottle that up. They're afraid of judgment and being ostracized. I asked my son, Micah, what he wished people understood about being a kid with a chronic illness. So this is what he told me. I thought this was good. He said he wished people would believe him. Remember, we talked about that in the other session, right? We wish people would believe him, not just about having a condition, but when he says that he's not able to push through something, that he really means it. And I think, again, even more so at that age, kids may be saying, come on, Micah, you can do this. They kind of pushing him into it. Most of the time, Micah can do it now. We're very thankful for that. But there are still times when he can't. There are still times where he has to pull back. And I think sometimes even his good friends will give him a hard time when he says that, he can't do it. Although Micah wasn't very sympathetic to me when we went to Mount Rushmore, and I didn't want to climb up the hill. And he told me, Dad, you can do this. And Micah was right. I made it up there. So I was very glad that he pressured me to do it. But most of the time, you don't want to do that. So one thing I told Micah when he was going through all this at the worst, I said, well, Micah, at least I can understand what you're going through. And he responded to me by saying, yeah, Dad, but you don't know what it's like to be my age and to be going and have it through these problems. And he was right. Just because I knew what it was like to have chronic illness and pain did not mean I could understand what it was like for him, what his circumstances were like. So instead of assuming that I understood his experience, I needed to just let him tell me. I needed to listen to what it was like for him, to ask him. So the takeaway there is we all have a different vantage point in the family. We need to listen to one another and validate their experiences. Something that we all can grow in. Micah, so I know what it's like to be the father of a child with a chronic illness that has impacted him. Micah knows what it's like to be that child as a young person, to live with a chronic illness. And as I mentioned, we shouldn't forget about their siblings. They are impacted as well. Within the family, then, that's what we want to do. We want to listen to one another. I wrestled with this question about how can churches help as a minister of families dealing with it in the church. So we have a family in our church that has a boy, a son, who pretty much all his life he has had life-threatening seizures. And they have tried and tried to find a solution. I mean, they have been to the Mayo Clinic. They've been to some fancy medical complex down in Dallas. They've had things implanted into his head and tried that. I mean, just everything. And nothing seems to help. They've tried also elimination diets. And this was actually suggested by some medical people at the Mayo Clinic. They said, well, try this, see if you take them off of, I don't remember what it was. Was it gluten or something like that? But whatever it was, it did not work. Actually, when they were trying that, he seemed to get worse. He can't go to school. So talking about feeling different than everyone, he's not able to go to school. And so he has to be homeschooled. He has two siblings who have been worried about their brother all their life. And I'm saying worried about whether he was going to live or not. They had to move closer to some family support. So they still come into Woodward to come to church at times, but they had to get closer to some other family. Well, that story has weighed heavily on me because here I am, I have this chronic illness and pain ministry, and it seems to be having an impact in different places around the world, and I don't know how to help this family with this kid right there in our own church. And so I have really wrestled with that. As part of the reason I want to dedicate more resources to developing a ministry for people like them. So what can a church do? How can a church help? And how can individual Christians help? Well, here's some suggestions, some things that I'm still working through, but maybe some of these will be helpful. So first, meet with, listen to, and pray with the family. Elders and ministers in a church should offer to meet them in their home, or if they're not comfortable with that, maybe you can meet them after church if they're able to come to church. But let them know that you care. Find out what their practical needs are. We can't help them if we don't know what they are. Find out if the church can assist financially with a medical trip. You know, we're talking about medical expenses with someone else today. We recognize the church can't take that whole weight off of people. But what if you could fund one of their trips down to the Mayo Clinic or down to Dallas or wherever it is that they have to go, where they have to stay for several days, or anything to kind of lift a burden from them. Sometimes unpaid bills due to medical costs. Or maybe they couldn't pay their rent, or they couldn't pay their utilities because they had to pay for this procedure. So we don't know unless we ask and we listen. So number 2, offer to bring meals to the family before and after stressful medical appointments or procedures. We've talked about bringing meals already in different contexts, but this is something that can be very helpful too. And our church has done this some for this family, and I think it's been very meaningful to them. It's a very profound demonstration of love. I think what happens though is we do this a lot for people after they have a funeral. They'll have a loss, and we'll bring them food, have people sign up, and they'll have food for however long. And someone else has a major surgery, they had a bypass or something, or a hip replacement, and people will bring food over to them. But the people that have ongoing medical conditions can kind of get overlooked because we just always assume that, they're having to deal with this, and and so they just get overlooked. And I think we could do a little bit better than that, because these things that they're going through with their children are very important to them. They're not something they can overlook. And I think we can come alongside them a little bit better. Here's another way we can do that. Organize a prayer vigil for the child and family. Our church has done this a couple of times for the family I mentioned. One of the times we did it, we were doing it at the building, and the family showed up to participate in it. This was right before some big medical procedure that he was about to have. Another time, we all drove out to his house, his parents' home, and we prayed standing outside our cars. We could not risk exposing him to anything because he was about to have a procedure and he couldn't get sick. So we didn't want to get that close to him in that situation. But I remember we just filled up their driveway with cars, and we were all there to pray for him and for that family. And what was cool is at the end of that, we all honked our horns so he could hear how many people were there to support him. So we have those moments, I think, of kind of occasional greatness where the church rises to the task in the moment. The problem is it's too occasional. We kind of have those moments and then we forget and we go on about our lives. 4, ask if they would like someone from the church to be present at the hospital, the surgery center, whatever it may be. They may or may not want that, but you just have to ask. And again, I think we do this better when someone's having a major surgery for the first time, but we let the frequency of the medical procedures for the chronically ill dull our sensitivity to them. And I feel like that's happened to me even in this situation that I've been telling you about today. Let them tell their story. If they want to, they may not be ready to tell their story, but if they want to, is there an opportunity for the family to share with the congregation what this journey has been like for them? Katie and I have been doing that this weekend. Is there an opportunity for other families to ever do that? It will be powerful to hear how God has walked with them through these trials. let them share how God has proven the words that he once spoke to the Apostle Paul. My grace is sufficient for you. If you want to see that in action, you have to go to the people where they had nothing else but that. And they have found that still God's grace was sufficient even in their worst days. Finally, let's follow up. Check in with them. Offer to watch the kids so you can give the couple a much needed break, a date night or whatever. Let them know that you will stand with them throughout this journey no matter how long it continues. You're not going to abandon them. You're going to be right there with them. And all these things I say, for me, as I look back on it in my time as a preacher, something I felt like I could do a better job of. And maybe even now that I'm no longer in that role, I can still try to do a better job of these things that I mentioned. Well, for discussion, what has your church done that's been especially meaningful for you? I don't know if any of you were in this situation with your kids, but if there's something that you thought was especially meaningful, you could share that with us. Nobody? Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, he's going to bring a mic over to you. Oh.
In Colorado to come down here to help Mom and Dad. There was the church took up a love offering because they knew, one, that we weren't sure what was going to happen with my job coming down here, but they took up a love offering to help out with the bills to be able to take the move and all that.
Yeah, that's such a thoughtful and loving thing for a church to do. Yeah. We had another family in our church. We weren't there when this was happening, but they had a child that was born with a very serious birth defect, and and I think there was question whether this child was even going to survive. He was actually a twin, and his sister was fine, and he was in jeopardy. And his name's Chad. Chad always brags about how the church rallied around him during that time. They were there with him at the hospital. They did meals for them forever, and so it's another one of those moments where I feel like if we're going to talk about, well, the church came up short here, let's share stories like that, I think, where the church really acted as the body of Christ for someone that was hurting. And you can answer any of these questions. I'll go ahead and bring all three up in case there's any one that you want to respond to. So what have been some very meaningful individual gestures? So we heard one there about the whole church doing something. Has there been individual gestures that you've seen be very meaningful for you or for others that you know during times like this? I kind of gave that example, of course, about Chad and his family. That even though that was the church doing it, it wasn't like the church. I think they didn't organize it formally through the church. It was just people that cared, and they did something. But anyone else have anything? Sydney, yeah. Oh, Mike's coming around. Yeah.
Yeah. When my grandfather was sick a few years ago, the pastor who was on his way, he was retiring at the moment, but he actually came out to my grandmother's house and sat with my grandfather and read hymns with him for 4 or 5 hours and read his favorite hymns and prayed with him and everything like that. And that was at a time where he was going through a lot of pain. And so it was really special to kind of watch my grandfather find a lot of peace and kind of have that relationship with somebody he had known for 30, 40 years and kind of somebody that was able to be with him in those final moments, but also bring him a lot of, peace of mind with being able to talk about what he loved the most. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think kind of really emphasizes the need that we invest time into people. And you said 4 or 5 hours. He wasn't just trying to check a box and get out of there. He was willing to spend time.
I'd like to share that when my husband was on hospice, the minister and one of the elders was always over every week. They never missed a week to come over and pray and visit.
Yeah, that's really good. she said that, if you couldn't hear very well there, that the minister and the elder was, when her husband was on hospice, was there constantly, for them. By the way, it's noticed when you're not there too. And I have seen that in my own family. Granny, talked about how when my grandfather was sick and he was dying, so kind of the opposite of the situation you're talking about. The minister, they didn't have elders at that church, but the minister never came by or said anything to my granny about it. Never called her, after the funeral. And that was, she remembers that. Stuck with her. Something else?
I remember here 2 years ago when I had put Mom and Dad both in the hospital, and there were several people from from the congregation here that were up there constantly checking on them.
Yeah, that's really good. It's good to hear stories like that. Larry's turn. Yeah, you're getting your 10,000 steps in, aren't you?
This is, I guess it's along the lines you're thinking. But we shared with you at lunch about our daughter who had the stroke, and that was right after we moved here. And the elders told me, you go do what you think you need to do. And that involved me being gone, though early in the ministry here, several Sundays. Sometimes it was 2 Sundays in a row that I would be gone. And at their request that I just take care of whatever I felt like I needed to take care of.
Yeah, that's it's wonderful, but to be, as in your position, to be treated as a family member, not just a hireling or an employee. So it's good to hear. Anybody else? Well, I'm about to kind of hit the home stretch here and wrap us up with a few things. I want to talk, though, for just a moment about sick children in the Bible. So there are many stories in the Bible involving sick children. And some of them have a happy resolution and some of them do not. And I'm not going to get into all the different stories, but you might think of some of the people that Jesus healed. You might also think about, for example, David's son that died in the Bible. So not all of them had this happy resolution. And the Bible doesn't specifically answer why children have to suffer. But they do suffer, and the Bible acknowledges that. I want you to understand the Bible doesn't duck from that challenge. It acknowledges that children suffer in this fallen world that we live in. And I haven't touched on the pain of losing a child because I'm not the one to speak about that. And if we're not in that situation, God forbid that happens to any of us here. Some of you, I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone, but some of you may know exactly what that's like. But I am impressed with Jesus' frequent elevation of children as not only being welcome in his kingdom, but he says about them that they are the greatest in the kingdom. And so he puts a special value on children. And so Matthew 18, 1 through 5 is that story. It says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, so who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a small child and had him stand among them. Truly I tell you, he said, unless you turn and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. Jesus was always doing this sort of thing with children. You might remember another time that parents wanted Jesus to lay his hands on them and to bless the children. Do you remember what the apostles were doing? They were running interference, weren't they? They were trying to keep the children away from Jesus. He got mad about it. And he said, let the little children come to me. And so I appreciate, even if I don't understand the suffering of children, I don't think any of us adequately understand that. I appreciate the heart of God shown through Jesus and his love for children and how he treated children. It is true that we can lose our children. As I said, God forbid, but it is true that can happen. But I think it's also important to point out this, that Jesus loses no one, especially our children. And there will be a day where death and pain will be no more. And I know we read this passage earlier today. I'm going to read a smaller version of it. We did 1 through 4, Revelation 21, 1 through 4. But I want to close this session with Revelation 21, 3 through 4, because it's just so encouraging. So even though we read it earlier in the day, it's worth reading again. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and He will live with them. They will be His peoples, and God Himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away. Sounds too good to be true, except for the one that is guaranteeing this is the one who has risen from the dead and ascended to the right hand of His Father and has promised to come again. And because of that, I can believe that that reality is our future. Even when everything in the world seems to be bent against it, to know that He will deliver on the promise of a new heaven and a new earth. So I'm going to close with that thought, and I'm going to close this in prayer. I think Larry wants to say a few things after that. And so let's pray. I get to see, I guess, most of you. I'll see you tomorrow as well in the Bible class and the sermon. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, I'm grateful for this day. It's been a long day. I think it's been a meaningful day. It's been a good day. God, even besides the sessions, the one-on-one meetings that Katie and I got to have with people, that was meaningful too. It was meaningful to us, and it's meaningful for us to hear stories of how you're in people's lives, even when there's a lot going wrong in their lives, God, that they still have the tenacity to hold on to faith in you. And not only that, but to tell others that God has been with them. There's nothing more encouraging than hearing that, God. So we just thank you for that today. And for this last session, God, as we talk about children, the suffering of children, the chronic illnesses in children, whether they be young like Micah was, or little kids like the kid with the seizures, or like Larry's grown daughter who had the stroke, whatever it may be, God, a parent's heart toward their child is constant. And we always, just by nature, we worry or we're concerned with them and their welfare. And so, God, help us to remember that if there is one that loves our children even more than we do, and that is you. And God, we ask that you be with them, be with us, and help us as churches and as individual Christians to rally around people who are going through these difficult times, to let them know that we care and we want to help and we want to support them. God, forgive us when we haven't done that. Forgive us when we've been selfish or when we turned away from people because we thought it was just too messy to get involved in. Help us to do better and help us to be like Jesus. We pray in His name. Amen.
Well, I'm sure happy and blessed that when I challenged you with this idea that you said, let's do it. Because it's been wonderful. I guess the only thing I regret is that more people weren't here to experience it, but they can experience it through you and me. And, of course, everything is recorded on our YouTube page. And Camille, how many online did you think we had tonight? About 500? 5. Oh, that's what I thought. 5. Okay. Okay. I think so. Yeah, I can do that unashamedly. And so we thank you for that very much. David will be teaching the combined adult Bible classes in the morning as well as preaching. So the blessing for me is Roderick said I could lead singing tomorrow. So you'll have to sit through that. I haven't shared this with you yet, but we have 2 people who would like to lead a support group. And that's what they told me. And they both qualify from what you told me. They're both dealing with their own chronic pain. And so I hope we can build on that and get that going, because I think it's a needed thing. It would be okay if those of us here tonight would find somebody who normally doesn't come and tell them they need to be here tomorrow, and experience and sharing what David will share with us. Are y'all headed back home right after we're done tomorrow? Or are you going to spend another day with the outlaws? Okay, I understand that. Well, we'll pray that y'all have a safe and a happy reunion there. Okay. Okay, let me offer a prayer, and then we'll be finished for tonight, and we'll see you in the morning. Father, I'm so grateful that you have a servant like my brother David and like my sister Katie, and that, Father, there's a willingness there on the part of David to just kind of get down and dirty with what he has been and will continue to have to deal with in his life, and be willing to share that, and be willing, Father, to in turn allow other people the freedom to talk about the things, the chronic things that they're going to have to deal with. And Father, especially for this evening and this afternoon, as we try to minister to people like that, just give us in our heart the right things to say and the right things to do. We know our motive is right, but sometimes expressing what is right is difficult. I'm thankful for these that stayed throughout the whole time here, Father, and pray that you'll bless them as well as others who've attended virtually and those who attended what they could. And that, Father, we indeed were all blessed. Keep us safe as we go to our homes tonight. Help us to have a really good night's rest so that when we get up in the morning, we'll be refreshed and strengthened and encouraged to come and lift up our sacrifice of praise in the morning as your family here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us for Broken and Mended Session 3. Please return back tomorrow for Bible class, where Brother David Heflin will join us and teach us about more tools and the future of Broken and Mended. And join us again tomorrow for the sermon where Brother David Heflin will preach.